Good morning, everybody. I'd like to welcome you to the home of Ellen and James Galligan here on Hartwood Road. Very happy that they allowed us to come to their lovely home and talk about the wonderful service that the Galligan family has provided to our community. James, could you tell me a little bit about the first Galligan who came from here, where it came from?
So the first Galligan was my great-grandfather, Michael E. Galligan, who came from Ireland. He came in 1840. The records would say he came from Meath, but he really came from Cavan. He originally came, if I remember correctly, and wound up working at Gilman's. He was worked up there. As you know, Gilman's was a very large complex up there. And he went to work when they were building the railroads up through this area. And eventually wound up working when they built the railroad from Port Jervis to Monticello, which was later, quite a few years after he came here. He wound up being the station master and working, I think, a foreman, what they called a foreman for a certain area.
So now we've got your great-grandfather, Michael, your grandfather, Michael.
Correct.
And then Michael marries and has children.
Yes.
Your dad being one of
those, right.
His name being Vincent.
Correct.
It's interesting. I wonder where the Vincent came from with all the other Michaels.
Never
knew.
Never knew, right.
Well, he's someone, your dad and mom, I got to know personally through meeting them Sunday at Mass, and obviously I knew that your dad was a supervisor of the town.
He was supervisor for 28 years, but his father was supervisor for a while.
Yes.
And his father was supervisor, my father was supervisor, my brother John was supervisor, and I've been supervisor.
Do you remember anything about what it was like during the war years in Forestburgh, as far as how that might have changed your life in any way?
Well, I'm sure it changed my life, but I was born under the end of the war, so I can't remember much about the war at all, other than I can remember the end of the war.
Well, I remember different...
And the only thing I remember about the end was the excitement, everybody being happy. I was a little bitty kid. I remember my parents talking about the war, and my mother had one of her, I assume was a volunteer job. She used to watch for airplanes. Opposite right about where Mike's house is now, on Galligan Road, there was a little cabin, maybe 10 by 10, 12 by 12. And supposedly, one of my jobs of my mother was to go over, and any plane that flew over, she would have to attempt to identify, because I remember as a little kid, I wish I still had it, there was a thing over in this little cabin that outlined the profile of all the different planes and told what kind they were. And she had, I don't know if she just wrote them down, or I don't think she called
I'm
someone.
sure it was a very responsible position, because I've heard this about this kind of stuff going on. I also heard that it was more difficult because of the rationing. Gasoline.
My father talked about the gas. Matter of fact, I think probably down in the house there, they still have some of the gas coupons.
I imagine it could be difficult since, I don't know if there are still a lot of horse and wagons around, but getting to Monticello or to any place where work or anything, it put a difficulty in, because you only had so much gas.
Oh yeah, right.
That you could use.
I remember my parents, and I don't know if it was because of gas rationing or they just didn't, but taking a horse and wagon to church. One of my father's job as a kid was in the winter to get stones or bricks and put them by the stove on a Sunday morning, get them nice and hot, and they'd wrap them up and put them in a blanket, and that kept my grandmother's feet warm while they took the horse and wagon to church up here at St. Thomas's. A lot of people keep referring to Forestburgh as being a very rural community where people, mainly houses and so forth. People don't remember that town of Forestburgh was I don't know if it's the right word, but a very industrial town. An example, Oakland Valley. My father claimed, he used to say, that when he was growing up, there were, a little before him, there were over 600 people living in Oakland Valley. There was, obviously the stone quarries were a big operation. A lot of the stone for the sidewalks in New York City came from Oakland Valley.
Yes.
A lot of the curb stones and so forth. Right.
There is.
They also bottled water in Oakland
Really?
Valley and sent it to the city. Right. The term scooper, which is very local, okay, and it's sort of it's sort of not.
It's the only place I've ever heard it used.
Right. Well, because it's very local. Up along the Neversink River, up above Oakland Valley, there was a factory that made scoops, and the reason they made wooden scoops because if you had sparks when you were shoveling food and stuff for your farm, for your cows, it could start a fire or explode. So they had wooden scoops. And they built them up along the Neversink River. And eventually the need for scoops was no longer. With the way they kept their feed and all that kind of stuff, they didn't need the scoops. So the scoop factory went out of business. But there were people who worked in the scoop factories who no longer had a livelihood. So they became poor and difficult. They had, they just didn't have the income that they had before. So the term got started when someone was poor and didn't have a lot of money and so forth. The other local people would refer to them as scoopers. What happened was there was a fire in the train, and an elephant, quite a few animals, but an elephant got killed or died, and they buried the elephant up there along the railroad tracks. The bones are buried up along the Cold Spring Road somewhere. There was a family, or a one-person Dill, and I think he was instrumental in talking about trying to get a firehouse in the town of Forestburgh. Felt there was a need. And tragically, there was a fire in his house, and he got killed, and I think one of his daughters, and that was really what got the other people in town to say, yes, we do need a firehouse.
We need to do this.
And it was about 1963.
I can relate personally in that when my husband Vince and I built our house, there wasn't a fire house. You had to have the firemen from Monticello respond. Mm-hmm. And the insurance company used to make the homeowner's insurance quite heavy because of that. Right. So he came up with a way to use our pond to provide our own protection. But his dad and several other members of the community got together, and we had in the house what was called a fire phone.
Yep. Your Vince Toomey Sr. was a commissioner, and I think there were 5 commissioners, and every commissioner had what they called the fire phone.
I remember both of us wondering if we could ever find one of them.
Yeah, it would be nice too. But
I remember it just being a regular old-fashioned dial phone with handle, and it was red.
Had a little lever on the top. And if there was a fire, that they all had the same number. All these fire phones had the same number. And if you had a fire, you called that number, and hopefully one of the commissioners who happened to be there would answer it, and you would say there's a fire at Jim Galligan's house. And they would flip a lever on the phone, which put off the siren at the firehouse, and then they held on the phone until somebody got to the firehouse, and they would pick up and they say, "Where's the fire?" And then again, that commissioner would say, Jim Galligan's house. And then they had a chain, a call chain, that various people would call the firemen and say, fire at Galligan's house. And I remember when I first became a fireman, the alarm would go off, and shortly after the alarm would go off, they didn't hear it would ring, and it was Steinberg. Harry Steinberg's wife, because he was a fireman, and she would say, tell Jim that there's a fire at so-and-so's house, and you'd get up and you'd go. So that was the system.
And now I understand that you are even more serving of your community by being president of the fire, is it the fire company?
Yes, fire company.
Right. And that would be fire company
Number one. We haven't gotten to number 2 yet.
And thank God the system is greatly improved.
Right, the system has greatly improved. Yeah, I've been a member of the fire company for pretty near 40 years, I think, or so. Yeah. But yes, the system has got much better. I can be in Florida, and I will now know as soon as there's a fire in Forestburgh. My phone goes off, and it says it's not only that there is fire, where it is, what kind it is, and so forth. So the system has improved greatly. It became a real community day, and lots of things got started about it, and people learned a lot about the town. Shortly after, I think the second year of Forestburgh Day, at the suggestion of my daughter and the hard work by a lot of people in town, Anthony Kane and a few others, they started the 5K race that went with that. And I think over the years, as part of the Forestburgh Day, they raised over $250,000 for the hospice. Right. Which
Very proud of
right,
that.
Right. So, but that's all part of Forestburgh Day, and I just I got it going. A reason I just thought it'd be good for the people in the community to get together, and we did lectures and all that. It's a little bit of like the fire company has quite a few activities, and
that was
part
the
of it
next
to make it a
thing
social activity, just for the people in town to get together.
I want to thank you and
sure.
your gracious wife for having us be here today.
Well,
thank you.
thank you. Thank you very much.